I'm still thinking about this redemption story that I was talking about recently, which is this idea that within traditional official Christianity, the big story, if you like, is one of original sin, and that original sin being redeemed by the death of Jesus on the cross, which I'm sure it goes without saying, but I don't really believe happened, or if it happened, it's I think it was a fairly routine means of torture at the time, but to the extent it forms a kind of significant kind of mythological narrative, what's the status of that narrative? And one of the things I was just thinking about was in terms of a kind of view of an extended version of oneself that reaches back in time, so that we don't think of ourselves as beginning and ending at the moment of our birth and the moment of our death, which in some ways are fairly arbitrary points in terms of the kind of ecological, biochemical, physiological processes that go on and that produce us. So if you kind of redrawing the boundaries of the self away from point of birth, point of death, perhaps even beyond point of conception, and consider oneself attached to a kind of narrative involving, I don't know, genetics or something like that, and histories, and you feel yourself to be reaching back into history and perhaps even reaching forward into history, then you come from the dog. Then the Jesus narrative maybe kind of makes sense if you've got a sense that that genetic history contains actions which we might think of as sinful. Things like racism, slavery, and anti-Semitism, and all the horrible stuff that accompanies that. I think it all seems to work sideways as well, actually, across species. Certainly my wife, who's quite sensitive to cruelty, can't bear to watch these nature programs in which one animal kills another animal. You know, cheetahs hunting down gazelles, those kind of things she finds quite distressing. And I think there is a sense in which, if we are thinking ourselves or redefining the borders of ourselves and identifying ourselves not just located within this particular patch of skin and bones that I occupy right now, but also kind of bleed across into other species. Guy! Again, I had to stop because there was a bit of intra-species rivalry with my dogs and another dog. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, so if we're redrawing the boundaries of what it means to be a self, beyond the sort of temporal boundaries of birth and death, to try and get a sense of identification with the wider narratives of biochemistry and ecology and evolution and those kind of things, then it also makes sense to draw them sideways across other species, so that you feel yourself to be kind of embedded and overlapping with the coexistence of other species, which is, as I say, why where you have to take on, if you like, or take on part responsibility for the activities of species which are not your own. To the extent that they are part of you, then you are responsible for the things that they do, and that can be pretty cruel at times. So I think in terms of a kind of narrative of an original sin, if we think of this extended version of what a person is, then there might be some original sin still being enacted out by our close cousins in the animal world. Where am I going with this? Oh yeah, I guess I'm just trying to think of it in terms of redemption. I don't really know how the Jesus narrative plays out in that story, but one of the ways it could play out, I guess, is as a kind of conscious desire to redraw the boundaries. To say, actually, enough of the past. We used to own slaves. We used to be racist. Those things used to be part of our responsibility, but now they're not. And yes, we used to have a part of our existence which was overlapping with the other animals around us, but we're going to say from this point onwards, it's not. We're going to draw the line here, and we're going to bisect that line with another line, and we're going to nail somebody to the cross. That seems to be the kind of response. We're going to say, this is At this point, history stops at this point, and from this point there is only humans. And humans are going to be different to animals, and they're going to be different from this point onwards than they were in the past. And there's a kind of symbolic acknowledgement of that by marking that point, by marking that point with an X, like a treasure map, and saying this is where humanity starts. It's like a kind of reborn myth, isn't it? You're reborn and you leave all your ancestral sins behind. You leave the cruelties of the massacre of the Maccabees behind, and you leave the cruelties of the animal kingdom behind by saying, no, from this point onwards we are just men, outside of history, outside of genetics, outside of everything else. And the boundaries become redrawn, I think, at that point. I suppose the problem with that is that certainly the morality of 2,000 years ago was not the morality of now, and a lot of what we would consider sins right now are still being committed, and were absolutely part of the fabric of the cultures at that time. So I think we would want to reenact that. I think we would want to do that again if we were, and I'm not saying we should want to do that, I'm just saying if we wanted to redo that, to make that particular kind of strategic move to feel better about our history or to feel better about our kinship with animals, we would have to be Jesuits, I guess, and kind of reenact the Jesus narrative daily. Keep nailing ourselves to the cross and say, no, at this point onwards, we start again. Day by day we make it new, starting exactly here and precisely now. I don't think it's a good strategy, by the way. That's not where I'm going with this. But I guess it's one interpretation of this Jesus myth and how that plays out in terms of original sin and redemption.